As a customer, what do you want out of a smartphone? Affordability, reliability, strong performance, customizability? Well, one could argue that the Google Pixel is exactly that. Google prices their Pixel phones very competitively for the Western market, starting at just $350 while offering nearly flagship level performance. Pixels also get strong reviews both from users and tech journalists. And the Pixels aren't some sort of sketchy knockoff that you buy from Alibaba either. Pixels come from one of the largest and most reputable companies in the world, Google. I mean, even if you don't especially like Google, it might make sense to get a Pixel and enjoy a strong smartphone experience on Google's dime. As such, you would think that this is the type of product that would explode in popularity. Google is solving all of the issues that people generally complain about when it comes to smartphones and giving customers exactly what they're asking for. And to be fair, the Pixel is performing quite well within a niche portion of the population, but it's very much just a niche portion of the population. Globally speaking, Google doesn't even control 1% of the market, despite having basically infinite resources, being around since the beginning of smartphones, and controlling Android. That's often pointed to as one of Apple's largest advantages. They're able to control both the software and hardware to create the best experience possible. But can't Google do the exact same thing with the Pixel? I'm picking on Google here, but I'm not talking about Google really at all. They're just the most notable example. You probably know a bunch of other smartphone models that are even more value-packed. Maybe it's from Xiaomi or Samsung or Huawei or even the iPhone SE. But regardless of which value-packed smartphone you're talking about, they all suffer from the same problem. No one buys them. So here's why the Google Pixel is having such a tough time becoming a big player, and why you should think twice before giving customers exactly what they want. Taking a look back, Google's foray with smartphones date all the way back to the beginning of smartphones in 2009. This year, Google would launch their first ever smartphone, the Android Dev Phone 1 for $400. They didn't market this phone very much because, as the name suggested, it wasn't made for consumers, it was made for developers. It didn't take much longer for Google to launch a consumer-oriented phone though. In 2010, they would come out with the Nexus 1, but this itself would turn out to be a massive flop. Why, you ask? Well, largely because Google was going against the grain. Instead of locking in contracts with all of the big national carriers, Google decided to sell the Nexus 1 directly to consumers for $530. Today, this is pretty much standard practice. Everyone knows about retail pricing and contract pricing for smartphones. But back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, there was only one pricing model that the average person was familiar with, the contract pricing model, and this was the only way to buy iPhones, at least within the US. You would usually pay $100 or $200 upfront for the phone and sign a 2-year contract with AT&T, Verizon, or Sprint. From there, you would pay a set amount every month for 2 years until you paid off the full cost of the smartphone. The reason Apple did this was to mask the true price of iPhones and to make the price a lot more digestible for a market that was seeing smartphones for the first time. It wasn't until mid-2011 that Apple started selling unlocked iPhones for retail price on their website. And it really wasn't until the late 2010s and until T-Mobile popularized unlocked smartphones that the average person became aware of the difference between contract pricing and retail pricing. Until then, as far as the average person knew, the price of an iPhone was $200. That's what they would have to pay upfront, and that's what they saw everywhere, at stores, on TVs, on magazines, on ads, everywhere. So when Google came in with an unlocked phone in 2009 for $530, the general public was naturally put off by the seemingly high price. Google's position within the overall market has changed over the years, but they're still very much going against the grain. While everyone is selling phones for $800 or $1,000, Google is trying to sell phones for $500 to $600, but it's the same underlying issue. By giving customers exactly what they want, you're always going to be going against the industry at large, which naturally earns you a lot of skepticism. And the thing is, the hardest people to sell to are not the people who don't want your product, but the people who don't trust your product. If you try to convince these people based on facts, they'll only be put off more. They'll start wondering, if your product is truly this awesome, what's in it for you? Basically, what's the catch? And that's exactly what's happening with the Google Pixel. Over the years, Google has built up a reputation as someone who does shady stuff to make money, like collecting data and intruding privacy. So when Google comes out with a smartphone that seems too good to be true, people immediately wonder why. And they're not wrong for wondering why. I mean, it's not like Google is handing out Pixels at zero margin as a philanthropic effort. No, they're handing them out at zero margin because they're okay with sacrificing profit to gain market share, and they know that they can monetize your use of the Pixel using Google services. So they do indeed have ulterior motives, and the problem is that when you go against the grain and give customers exactly what they want, these ulterior motives become more visible than ever. So Google is constantly having to fight this uphill battle against consumer skepticism. But that only tells half the story, because even consumers who aren't skeptical don't want the Pixel. From the very beginning, the smartphone industry has been somewhat of an aspirational category. Half of this is because of marketing and how smartphones have been positioned over the years. Apple, for example, has simply leaned more and more into premium branding, especially with the Pro series. Realistically speaking, Apple knows that the average person won't spring for the Pro series. That's why 80% of their lineup is not the Pro series. With that being said though, the Pro series is actually extremely important for the rest of Apple's lineup because it provides context. It establishes Apple as someone who puts out top-tier pro-level phones. And while you may not be able to purchase the Pro series today, it gives you something to aspire to. This is a very common marketing technique used across a wide range of industries. It's the same reason why Costco puts a bunch of super expensive TVs right at the entrance. It asserts that that's what the most successful Costco shoppers are buying. And by having a Costco membership, you too are part of that elite group of shoppers. It's the same thing with the American Express Black Card as well. Most of these items are something that the average person will realistically never get, but the presence of these items are what make all the difference. So that's the marketing side of things. The other half of the story is simply how smartphones fit into our lifestyles. The average person spends over 3 hours on their smartphones every day, and if you're on the younger side of things, that number is likely even higher. As such, people don't view buying smartphones the same way as buying trash bags or paper towels or some other household item. With these sort of items, most people do just get the cheapest option with the decent reliability. With smartphones, however, people see it as more of an investment. They're gonna end up spending thousands of hours on this device, so they're much more willing to spend the extra $100 or $200 and get the better phone, even if they don't need it. And this only makes it even harder for Google to sell the Pixel. Even if they're able to overcome the skepticism surrounding the Pixel, consumers still just don't want it. It's more than likely that the average consumer would say something along the lines of, "It's great that Google is offering a well-priced competitive option, but for myself, I'd like getting something a bit more high-end." And when they say high-end, they usually just mean getting a lower-end iPhone for the same price. Hearing this, you might be saying that Google just needs to advertise more. If they just put the Pixel in front of people more often, people will finally get it, right? Well, the truth is that Google has already been spending hundreds of millions on marketing. Now, to be fair, that is 4 to 5 times less than Apple and Samsung historically, but here's the deal. Google's market share is not 4 to 5 times less than Apple and Samsung, it's more like 30 to 40 times less. AKA, despite being the king of digital ads, Google's return on advertising spend is garbage in comparison to Apple and Samsung. Now, this could partially be due to the marketing campaigns themselves. Maybe Google's campaigns just aren't as good. But I suspect that this has more to do with all of the intangible factors that we've been discussing. Apple and Samsung's flagship phones simply strike a chord with consumers that Google's budget phones don't. And this is largely because smartphones are often an aspirational, guilty pleasure type of purchase, not something that's strictly objective or logical. And that brings us into the real takeaway of all of this, which is that consumers often simply don't know what they want. We often hear the business mantra that the customer is always right, and in some industries like hospitality and tourism, that's a great slogan to live by. Even if the customer is technically wrong, it's better to assume that they're right to keep them happy. This mantra, however, doesn't work all that well within tech or really any innovation-driven industry because the truth is, customers have no clue what they really want. Henry Ford had this famous quote that if he had asked customers for what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Steve Jobs very much took this quote to heart as he strongly believed that people don't know what they want until you show it to them. That's why he never relied on market research. His task was to read things that are not yet on the page. And this sort of trailblazer mindset is what led to many of Apple's best innovations. For example, choosing to not use a stylus, using intuitive methods to zoom in and out by pinching the screen instead of pressing a plus or minus button, Face ID instead of Touch ID, and so on. Oftentimes, Apple's products aren't initially well received by the public because consumers aren't convinced that that's what they want. The iPhone X, for example, was memed as the $1,000 emoji machine, and the AirPods were scoffed at as overpriced Bluetooth headphones. But over time, both of these have become extremely popular. In fact, the entire world is moving towards iOS, and Android is bleeding market share. And this is especially true in developing countries like India. As soon as people are able to afford an iPhone, they tend to get an iPhone. And I'm not saying this to hype up Apple or something. Rather, I'm trying to illustrate how people don't exactly do what they say. If you ask anyone, they'll say what they want is a reasonably priced, reliable smartphone. But where they actually end up spending their money is an overpriced phone that fulfills intangible values such as status, aspirations, fitting in, and whatever else. And the problem for Google is that the Pixel is a manifestation of what people say they want, not what they really want. With historically high interest rates, the appeal of bills and bonds is higher than ever, yet traditional brokerages haven't really adapted with the times. They still expect people to use clunky bond tables, scroll through long overwhelming lists, and even use virtual keyboards till recently. And that's why we created our own modern bond platform, Silo. At Silo, we prioritize the user experience and the ease of finding and investing in the issuers you know and trust, so that you too can easily lock in high yields. Also, choosing a strong user experience does not mean sacrificing on safety. Every Silo account is insured by $500,000 in SIPC insurance and $2.5 million in FDIC insurance. Also, all funds deposited on the platform will be maintained by our trusted custodian, Interactive Brokers, who has experience managing $373 billion worth of assets over the past 45 years. So, if you're looking for a modern way to invest in bonds, please consider checking out Silo in the description below. It seems that this is the case not just for the Pixel, but Android in general. Check out this video to learn more. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.